Welcome to the 8th episode of the podcast. This is your proprietor, Tony Ortega, coming to you from an undisclosed location deep inside the interior of the Earth's crust, otherwise known as the underground bunker. This week, we heard from an old friend who had found a remarkable artifact from Scientology watching history. We're talking about Patty Moher, who sent us a video she found that had been shot in 2008 at the height of the anonymous phenomenon. The video shows a presentation that Patty gave in Boston discussing a wide variety of Scientology's controversies. We were happy to post the video, but it reminded us that if there's one person who deserves more recognition for their contributions in this field, it's Patty. So we're very glad that we got this opportunity to talk with her, and we think you'll see why Patty truly is one of the greats. Patty, thank you so much for joining me here at the Underground Bunker podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here with you. I actually miss seeing you and talking to you like the old days.
Well, we're going to get into that, and there's a lot of stuff to cover. First of all, thank you. You found a video right during the height of the anonymous phenomena. You gave a talk in Boston.
Yep.
You have relocated that video. I went through it. It's fascinating how much material you covered. And that's given me an excuse to have you on the podcast. And I have a lot of different thoughts about this because you and I go back so long, and I know you in a couple of different ways, but it's disappointing to me that more people don't know about you. I think this is one of the things that I have done a poor job telling people about the amazing contributions you have made to this field. So I want to get into that a little bit, and we'll go from the beginning. But there's so much that people should know about what you went through, and then the way that I got to know you was, I don't know, was it 10 years ago?
Yeah.
You were having these fantastic barbecue blowouts in your backyard in Connecticut every summer.
Yep.
And it was a wonderful way for people to get to meet each other. That's where I first met Chuck Beatty for the first time, Professor Steve Kent, Denise Brennan. So what a wonderful thing that was.
Yeah, well, that was the purpose of those. It was to back then the real purpose of those SP parties was to network, to get people together so that we can remove or just close down this horrible cult. And I knew that once people hooked up in real life and talked to each other, then they were going to go back home and they were going to make plans and share information. And it was just something that I felt was important in order. And plus, it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. You did a great job on those, and I know they were a lot of work for you.
Yep.
But that was around 2011 or 10 or something.
Yeah,
let's go way back. Your involvement is so interesting, and I think most people don't know it very well. And I haven't written very much. Let's start at the very beginning. Tell me quickly, how did you get into Scientology?
In 1973, I ended up going to the Narconon program in New London, Connecticut. I had recently started using heroin, some hard drugs, and decided that wasn't a good idea. And Narconon was available, and I went down there. And I think the COM course was the original course. It was $50, and basically it was all Scientology material. They didn't have any sort of Narconon books back then. We just used straight Scientology bulletins and policy letters. It was packed up with the name Narconon on the top. And I got hooked. I got involved with the Narconon, and it was just a very short jump into becoming a Scientologist, because actually it was promoted that this was Scientology, just in a different form, different type of organization.
And then where were you involved in Scientology after that?
Well, I became the director of Narconon after a few years. Oh, I was so qualified, as you can tell. All I had behind me was Hubbard stuff, nothing other than a high school education. From there, I was recruited into the Guardian's office, and I was placed as the director of rehab for New England, which controlled all of the front groups for education and drugs. So the ASI, Applied Scholastics, was under it. The Apple schools, Narconon, anything that dealt with those front groups that promoted the tech. I was in charge of running, and we had a few of them. We had a Narconon in Boston, one in London. There was an ASI in Boston, an ASI in Connecticut, and an Apple school. And then, two Apple schools. One was in Connecticut, run by Tony Triambianis, who ended up being the head of OSA for the Northeast, no, for the whole East Coast rather. And there was an Apple school in Milton, Mass, or ended up becoming Adelphi. So I ran all these groups with, they had to report statistics to me and any problems, and I go in there and do inspections, and it was totally controlled by the Guardian's office.
And what year would that have been that you were doing that for the
That
Guardian's
was,
office?
that's going to be 1980, 81.
Okay, so after the raid,
Yes,
after the prosecutions, but before the Guardian's office had been dismantled.
exactly.
And just so people understand, I mean, the Guardian's office was the spy wing of Scientology. It had a lot of different functions, but definitely the spying and the dirty tricks operations were handled by the Guardian's office.
Absolutely. Invest was right down the hall from us. It had 3 or 4 staff. Even being part of the GO, you couldn't even go into that office. It was so tightly controlled unless you were invited in. So the way it would work is Invest would get all this information, and it would either hand it off to the other parts of the Guardian's office, which was the legal department and the public affairs or public relations. So they would take care of that part of the problem of maybe they're going to sue somebody or just PR the crap out of them in a bad way.
And Invest is short for investigation. So I mean,
Exactly.
this was the Guardian's office in charge of spying on people.
Oh yeah, I remember this guy Warren Frisky. He was in the Guardian's office Invest. I remember him like every night coming in with black garbage bags, and finally I figured out he was stealing somebody's trash. But, but I didn't know what was going on at first. But I would see that all the time, just walking through the hallways with somebody's trash. I was like, what's going on in there?
Well, then did you subsequently see the Guardian's office get taken apart and replaced by the Office of Special Affairs, OSA?
Yes, I think, just left the Guardian's office at that point. I was out of there, and basically I did my 2.5 year contract, but I said, I wanted to start a family, and I didn't want to do it while I was on staff. So I did see a lot of what was going on. The Guardian's office was, in fact, the dirty tricks department. When they changed over to the Office of Special Affairs, it was really just in name only. I mean, everything else still applied. It was a big lie. It was a PR thing because the Guardian's office had created that huge flap of investigating the U.S. government, and they got caught and they got exposed, and Mary Sue Hubbard, Ron's wife, and a few others went to jail, and so they had to change it over to something more acceptable for the public. So they became the Office of Special Affairs in name only.
Right. And just going back to the story you've told us so far, I just want to point out two things that people should hold on to, and that is that all of these efforts for the public, like rehab, uh, the curriculum in schools, all these front groups were behind the scenes being run by Scientology's secret police, Scientology's spy wing.
Mm-hmm.
And also that, as it happened to you, that part of the function of something like the rehabs Narcanon is to bring new people in to Scientology. So this is a recruitment effort. It's a way to infiltrate things like schools, and it's all being run by Scientology's controlling interests.
Yes, absolutely.
So you stayed with Narcanon after that? Were you still running the Narcanon? And where was that one located?
Well, the one I was originally at was in New London, Connecticut, right here. But then when I went into the Guardian's office, that was out of Boston. It was out of the Boston org. So I moved to Boston at that point and stayed up there while on the GO staff. And after I left the GO, I was off staff. Well, I never returned to staff, but I did end up being brought in, let's say, mid to late 80s. I got brought in as what's called an OSA volunteer into the Invest, or the, what do they call it? Not Invest, for it. Um, but it's intelligence. I was brought into the intelligence office for volunteer work because they considered me so fully indoctrinated, and I was not a high risk to go up and join the SPs at all. I was fully and thoroughly brainwashed, and they liked it, and so I got to work with OSA on a volunteer basis. I don't know, for maybe 10, 12 years. I'm not even sure how long I did it for.
Wow, so a decade of helping OSA
Yeah,
with its spying.
absolutely. I mean, it was I some of the things at first they would put me on something was ODC, which is overt data collection. So there were no computers back then. So I would have to go to courthouses and go through probate records and go through civil suits and go through criminal suits with a name and try to collect anything I can, bankruptcy court, whatever. If I was given a name, I was given a checklist with all these places I would have to go and collect information, marriage records, divorce records, whatever. I'd have to complete that person, then I'd be given another person. And would do something like that for a while. And then they had me infiltrate what they call a squirrel group. This was a group run out of Massachusetts with a bunch of, some of them were ex Scientologists, and some of them would be considered like a free zone back then, but that's not what they called it. It was just a bunch of people practicing Scientology outside of the church's uh, permission.
Independently.
Yeah, and
Independently.
so they flipped out. The church flipped out over this, and they wanted these groups closed. So I spent 2 years in this group, um, collecting information about who they were and what they did and where they met, and um, just so it was awful. But I did this because I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, which is no excuse. I mean, it's really despicable behavior, but at the time I did it. I thought it was, I was the best thing for doing
Did
this.
this group that you infiltrate ever realize that that's what you were there for?
Oh yeah, because after 2 years they blew my cover. I mean, they really. It was like all of a sudden I come in one day to find out what I'm supposed to be doing next, and I was told that RTC sent a letter to this woman who runs the group, and basically everything they said was the only person who would know this information was me.
Oh
So,
wow.
so I'm like, what is? I'm like, why? And I guess they just figured. I don't know what they figured. I never understood, but it's constantly. That's the basic craziness and wonderful craziness of Scientology is they will always, no matter what, do something stupid and to just ruin everything. They just can't have it so that it just works out. Someone has to screw it up. And it's just part of the tech, and it's what makes it sometimes hysterically funny. But
And then these people that you were instructed to go down and dig up records on, were these targets?
they were targets. They were somebody who was somehow hurting Scientology in their opinion. Maybe they spoke out against them. Maybe they were a reporter, an investigator, or maybe it's a judge that's going to be coming up on a case, or a lawyer they're interested in hiring, or an opposition lawyer. Anybody that they needed to know everything about. Because the whole purpose of that is once you know what's going on with this guy and his connections, you will definitely, in their belief, find criminal activity in their past, which once you expose or threaten to expose, they'll shut up or go away. So that's what I
Wow.
was looking for. I was looking for dirt, maybe a dirty divorce or something. I was looking for dirt on the guy, or at least with over data collection, it gives you the basis to now go into what's called covert data collection, which is where you would infiltrate or make friends with somebody, something on that matter, so that you can get even more information about the person.
Wow. And you weren't the only one, right? About you must have known about some other volunteers that were also
Oh
doing this
no, you
kind of.
never know about other volunteers because part of the whole OSA thing is the need to know. So
Right.
I could be working on one project and somebody else I that is in the church could be working on the same project, but we'll never talk because we only talk to our handler, the person who is going to get all the information. So no, I never worked with anybody or was told. I sort of knew because I would see them going in and out of the office, but I would never ask them what they were up to because that would be definitely against the rules. You're not
Right.
supposed to know stuff like that. Only what you know.
Wow. So
Mm.
then after 10 or 12 years of doing that work, what changed?
Well, I right around it's got to be 1999, 2000. Mary Frances Newey, who ran OSA in Boston at the time, ran their Invest unit, called me up and wanted me to. Um, the first thing she wanted me to do was she wanted me to call Bob Mitten's wife and tell her that Stacy, this woman that I can't remember her last name was, that was dating Bob Mitten,
Stacy
what
Young.
Stacy Young had been in her house and slept in her bed and just try to create this um, situation for the wife where she would hate her husband. And I refused. I said, no, I'm not doing that. That's awful. I'm like, who does stuff like this? Not realizing how bad they are. Even me, who's doing the awful stuff, didn't realize to what extent they'll go. And I said, no. So then what they asked me to do was go to, the Lisa McPherson Trust in Clearwater had just recently opened up with Bob Mitten. I guess they had been open for a month or two, and Bob Mitten at the time was the number one SP in the universe to Scientology. They were just 24/7. This guy, he was covered every inch of his life. And they said he set up this group and he has a mission statement. And the only way you'll be able to see it is if you go onto this group called Alt Religion Scientology, which is a Usenet group. It still exists, but I don't know how often it's used. Um, and it's about Scientology. And Bob Mitten has printed or posted there his mission statement. I needed to read this so then I could start making phone calls to the Lisa McPherson Trust in an attempt to tie up their phone lines with imaginary cults of other sorts, saying my sister was involved in Wiccan or something like that. But they wanted me to read this mission statement. Well, boy, that was a mistake. When I got there, I not only read the mission statement, I started reading everything.
Well, and that's a great point. Let me just back out a little bit for some of the newer readers of the bunker who may not know this history. Bob Minton was this wealthy businessman from New England who, for whatever reason, I guess I should learn this history, but for whatever reason, became very interested in Scientology and its controversies and its abuses.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was very concerned about the Lisa McPherson matter. Lisa McPherson, a member of Scientology who had died at the Fort Harrison Hotel in December 1995. And to help expose that situation, Bob Minton spent millions of his own money helping to get word out about Scientology's abuses.
Right.
And one way he did that was he created a group called the Lisa McPherson Trust. He actually rented a storefront there in Clearwater. People from around the country came who had been criticizing Scientology, wanted to be part of that effort. People like Jeff Jacobson and Mark from Arizona and Mark Bunker from Southern California. Just all flocked to this effort being put together by this wealthy businessman, Bob Minton, who was a really fascinating person. I got to talk to him one time. And this was, back in, God, it would have been 1997 or 8. I talked to him. Anyway, then, yes, because he was the focus of so much of this effort and was concentrating all this criticism about Scientology, he came under a hellacious multiple layered Scientology operation to try to destroy him. And it turned out he had some business dealings in Nigeria that were questionable, and Scientology dug those up. And then you were asked to do this one thing, which was that he had started this new relationship. That was definitely something Scientology was trying to go after.
Right.
Um, and they made the mistake of asking you to go look at ARS, which at that time was, yeah, a Usenet, early internet on the Usenet, and where all kinds of amazing information was coming out about Scientology every day. This was the place to be in that period from like 95 to 2000. And you went to go do this, and they didn't realize that they were basically giving you the key to the kingdom.
That's right. I mean, what a mistake. I was like, once I got there, I was just fascinated. I was like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? Because I worked, my thinking at the time was, well, I work for OSA. And what OSA handles is and theta, which is interbulated theta or bad news, bad things that happen, just upsetting, disappointing, upsetting things in life. So as an OSA person, I thought, well, of course they're going to send me here because, I'm used to dealing with, really awful stuff, what OSA handles. And I get there and I start reading this stuff and I just become fascinated. And then I start posting there without OSA knowing it.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I started posting for the first month and, oh, I was getting slammed by all these critics who just thought I was just, they were just playing with me because I was just a cultist with Scientology thinking, and they were trying to sort of, some of them were trying to debate with me, but others were just like hammering me what a jerk I was. And then there was this one woman, I believe her name was Katrina Parnell or Parmel. She was from somewhere in Scandinavia, and she was an ex-Scientologist, and I believe she was ex-Sea Org. And she answered one of my questions by telling me all about forced abortions. And I didn't believe at first. But she was so nice and so pleasant and so sweet in her communications to me that it shocked me because I thought these people were all going to just basically attack me and hammer me. And instead, she just produced some facts and was kind. And that started, whoa, what's going on here? And I left. I had to quit because I thought I was definitely going to get in trouble. Even though I was posting, Scientology had no idea it was me because I was able to post through a group where they would hide my IP address, so Scientology couldn't find me. Um, and I left there for a while, and I continued to read all these criticisms. And then one day, out of the blue, a this OT8 guy from Europe contacted me in an email, and he started basically explaining to me what Scientology was all a bunch of crap. And it came from an OT8, so it had some weight as I was considered myself a Scientologist at the time.
Right, right.
And that opened even more doors. And all of a sudden, I started reading critical sites and critical information. And I think I spent 2 weeks just at the computer, just calling for takeout and just like not moving from the computer, reading everything I could find. And at the end of that, I was really pissed off. I was really pissed off for having been what I considered at the time betrayed by Scientology, especially by Hubbard. And the more I read, the more I realized it was a con. And it took a while. I mean, it didn't happen immediately. It took me time to get rid of it because my indoctrination was so. I mean, I was somebody probably people thought I would never leave. I was going to be the hardcore, would always be in Scientology type. And instead, I was really severely angry at these guys and realized what a bunch of bullies they were and how awful Miscavige was and how awful Hubbard was. And I I hooked up with a bunch of critics. All were non-Scientologists. They had with this thing called IRC, Internet Relay Chat. This is again old internet stuff where you would get into these private groups and talk to people. And I got invited into a group of critics, including your lawyer, Scott,
That's right, Scott.
um, Dave Turetsky, uh, a guy named Rob Clark, who was a harsh, very harsh critic back then, brilliant computer guy. Um, the A woman out in Arizona. She goes by the nickname of Muriel. I think Katie, there was a woman named Katie in there. She's a reporter for stuff up in Canada. So there were no Scientologists in this group or ex Scientologists. And I got into this private group with them and they sort of helped me. And one of them actually came to my house and set up my computer so I could post completely 100% anonymously. That I forget what it was called, but this guy Rob came and just hooked up my computer so that I could post without any worries that Scientology would ever figure out who I was. And I was able to do that for almost 5 years until they
And
got me.
one thing that strikes me is, and this is maybe a lesson for people, right around the same time that this Katrina was very nice to you and just wanted to give you some facts, and it stunned you that she was so friendly about it. Right about that same time, Tori Chrisman
That's right.
was going through the exact same thing with Andreas Heldahl Lund. She had
Exactly.
also, as an OSA volunteer, had gone on ARS and had done battle on behalf of the church. And then Andreas from Norway said to her, "Look, the way that you're responding to us, you're copying all this extraneous information, and it's hard to read your arguments. If you do this, that, and the other thing, it'll be easier for us to see what you have to say." And she was absolutely floored
Yep.
that somebody that she was trained was the absolute devil, because of course Andreas Heldahl Lund ran
Right.
Operation
Clued
Clam,
on that. Right.
would be so polite and helpful. And it just pulled the rug out from underneath her.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind, folks, that sometimes Scientologists need to see that the people outside really are kind and helpful, and it will stun them because they're trained to believe the opposite.
Exactly. And it made a huge difference. I mean, she really made the final breakthrough of like, holy cow, I got to read more about this because she is so nice. And I've told people when people would come to me and say, how do you get people out of Scientology? So, well, one of the things you don't do is make fun of them and bash them and call them names and make them feel stupid. I said, that just feeds into it. Don't do that. And some people just don't get it. But again, the kindness is definitely was a factor for me.
So now you're out in your mind and you've joined this IRC chat with people like Scott Plutek and Professor Dave Turetsky at Carnegie Mellon University, who
Hmm.
was one of the giants
Yeah,
in the early internet of putting Scientology's information online. So you're in this private chat with them, but you can post anonymously. This next period, I think, is the period you should be known for, is that you did amazing work over the next several years getting out information about Scientology, and it drove them nuts because they didn't know who it was, right?
yes, it was wonderful. I mean, I used all their nasty invest tech against them. All the stuff they had taught me, and now I'm posting anonymously. I am spending every time a new mag comes out, I am spending hours typing the completions list, and I'm feeding it. I had hooked up with Christy Watchter from what is that? Truth About Scientology. She's the one who keeps all those completion lists.
Right.
Well, she's the brains of that operation, and I was the brawn. I spent just literally thousands of hours typing up those names and getting them to her and working so that I really felt it important that in the future for journalists and even other Scientologists or anybody who was looking up a name, it would come up that this person was a Scientologist. And boy, that caused a whole lot of freak out.
And let me just interrupt and say how huge that has been over the years for journalists, particularly for this journalist. Christie came up with an amazing idea, and she maintains it to this day. And I know she gets a lot of flack. I know there are people constantly saying, "Take me down," et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
What Scientology puts out a mountain of their own publications that they send to other Scientologists. So if you're a Scientologist, you're getting Source magazine and Impact magazine and all these magazines from Flag and the Free Winds and everything. And Scientology likes to post completions. What that means is when somebody finishes OT1 or OT3, they're published in there. Well, that's public information once those magazines get passed around. And
Exactly.
so, you and other people have collected those magazines and then done the hard work to type those completions into a database that you can access online. And they're still kept pretty, whoever's doing it, I don't know if it's you or some other people, they're still doing pretty fresh new information.
Yeah, I noticed. It's not me. I don't know who it is either. I'd like to know, but whoever it is, they're keeping up, and that's really
It's invaluable because it's one thing when to somebody might use some lingo about that might identify them as a Scientologist, but if there's a completion in a Scientology published magazine, that's pretty good evidence that they are clear or L11 or OT5. And that's how we know, for example, that Greta Van Susteren and her husband John Cole have both done OT4, which I wrote about. That's the bizarre drug one.
right.
So anyway, that's amazing work, and yes, I know you just did incredible amounts of labor to get that going.
Oh yeah, and I really knew eventually it would pay off, and it has, like you said. And the other thing I was doing back then is I was certainly posting articles from these Scientology magazines. That was somehow sometimes useful because uh, they would print a big win about how some police officer in Cincinnati, Ohio, gave them an award, and then all of a sudden, critics are writing to this guy telling him, "Do you realize what you've done?" So a lot of their plans were ruined, and they couldn't use people again because once the critics had the information of who was allying or being supporting Scientology, they would get an education, and that ally would disappear. So that was, and then the most fun thing I did was obviously was I was involved in leaking a lot of videos. That was so much fun because the internet was just the timing was perfect. All these crazy Scientology videos. I had people. I had people who knew who I was that was sending me this information, trusted people, and to get, for instance, that song. What was it called? "We Stand Tall," and
We
the
stand tall.
yeah, the funeral video, and a whole bunch of others I had, and I was just making copies, CDs, and just passing them out to everybody at that point.
And of course, I think you were involved in the single greatest Scientology video of all time, which of course is the Tom Cruise interview. I think you were one of the people, I think there was a whole chain of people that were involved in getting that out to the world. Isn't that right?
That's right. That was a group effort by a lot of different people because I just didn't know how to get it up on the internet. What had happened was, what's that fellow's name? He wrote a book on Tom Cruise. An English guy did the
Morton.
Andrew
Andrew Morton.
Andrew Morton. He was going to be going on, I believe it was NBC morning show about the Tom Cruise book, and I somehow through friends I got to him and said I got this video. Well, we finally got whatever the circumstances are. We got that video up online so it could start being used. And as soon as Scientology saw it, that Tom Cruise video just shows him as what a lunatic he really is. And Scientology flipped and tried to get it taken down, and then all of a sudden it snowballed. Somebody's trying to remove this video from the internet, so of course the entire internet community went up in arms, and it was the biggest, another like a big mistake that they just made, and Anonymous grew out of that because they were fumed that they were trying to take down the video, and It was just so much fun back then. I mean, really, it was a blast doing that stuff. But
It's
but I have to tell you, I want to tell you,
yeah.
part of my doing all this, my labor intensive writing of the list, was because I really felt that I needed to make amends. I really felt that I had done so much wrong to so many people that I needed to make it right. And the only way I could do that is by exposing them. And with the advice, certainly, of these people, these professional wogs, if you will, who would they you know would talk to me, and I would get ideas on what would be useful for them. Like, what do you need? What can I provide? And I just did it, and I did it happily, because I was so upset at my behavior over the past 27 years, and just needed to make it right.
Well, you provided some incredible stuff, and I don't know that you got all the credit you deserve, but definitely, with the Tom Cruise thing, Cruise had been kind of away from Scientology for a while. He got back into it. They really spun him up to be the most gung ho Scientologist. So by 2004, David Miscavige wanted to give him to recognize him. So they had this very special event for him in October 2004, and the video is actually a 35-minute full
Right.
video of all these things about Tom and how he's the greatest. He gets a greater reach about Scientology than anyone else in the world. And then, as part of that 35 minutes, there's this 9-minute video of Tom in a turtleneck talking about what a privilege it is to be a Scientologist and KSW and SPs. It's just amazing. And it was only intended to be shown to that audience of Scientologists so they could see how he was one of them,
Right.
right? So he's talking in the full code. He's trying to show other Scientologists how into it he is. It was never meant to be seen by the public.
Mm-mm.
So when it was then leaked 4 years later, it caused such a sensation, and then Scientology tried to squelch it, and that's when this loose association of people that called themselves anonymous, that had been for a couple of years looking at various other things, found a cause and said, "Okay, that's it. We're going to expose Scientology." And so the video, you and several others helped get it out to the world in January 2008. So by February 2008, Anonymous had put together sort of a program and started having protests in real life. And we're doing these massive, exposures of Scientology online. And right in that heady time is when you came out to give that talk in Boston. So help me understand how you went from like the most effective undercover leaker in Scientology history to now suddenly you're on stage in front of people in public identifying yourself. How did that go?
Well, I met the woman in charge of the Boston Skeptics at one of the protests in Boston. Uh, I I don't remember her name now, but she was interested in me talking, and I had always, like you said, been sort of doing things anonymously or quietly behind the scenes, and not taking credit for stuff, just making sure it gets out there. And I had to think about it, like, do I want to go that public where I'm actually going to be talking about this stuff? And I said, yeah, let's do it. It's going to be the next level of stuff I did. And I had so much fun doing that, because just prior to that, about 6 months prior to that, Dave Turetsky and I and a couple of others had been invited by the AMA to give talks at their convention in New Orleans, and it was very hush hush and secret. We weren't on any of the invitations or any of the programming or what was planned for the day. It was all very quiet, because they were terrified that the Scientologists were going to come in there and disrupt the meeting. And Dave and I had both done PowerPoint presentations at the time, and mine was mostly on psychs and my own experience in Scientology, and he had done some stuff that talked more about Scientology thinking. He's really, really had Scientology down, and my lecture, I talked to Dave and asked him to send me his PowerPoint, and I asked, can I use some of this in his course, and I put it all together. So that's why it was so much material, because some of that material came from Dave, who's just a genius as far as I'm concerned when it came to putting together stuff. Real, he's a professor, for crying out loud. He's really
Yeah.
really good guy. And anyway, that was after that I started doing more and more public things. I spoke to some TV program in Australia about Knocking On, and I did this French documentary for about Knocking On, mostly about Knocking On, because they didn't have a lot of people talking, and back then they were like still even well now I'd say after Anonymous everything broke open. You got all kinds of great critics coming in, people from the top of the
Yeah.
organization quitting, and it became a whole nother scene. And I didn't know those guys. I was just this little person over in Boston, just pulling information as I could. But those guys really cracked it all open after that, and it was I could sort of feel okay about sitting back and relaxing and just watching it happen.
Well, yeah. I mean, Anonymous had so many good investigators and
Hmm.
researchers,
Oh,
but maybe their most effective thing they did was they provided cover. And before Anonymous came along, if you in the 1990s or early 2000s, if you were an ex-Scientologist and you spoke up, I mean, it was scary. They
oh
they
yeah,
would focus everything on you. But when thousands of people around the world are all exposing Scientology at the same time, that provided some cover. And
exactly.
you're right, in that period between 2008 and 2010, that think of all the people that came out at that time with books and talks. Mark Headley to
Right.
Amy Scobie to the Tampa Bay Times series. And I really feel like Anonymous helped create that kind of a situation
Yes, I
where
agree.
Scientology just couldn't harass everybody at the same time. Now once you started speaking out publicly, did OSA come after you?
Well, yes. What happened was they were always trying to figure out who I was. They were just. I would get phone calls because I used to report on events. I would go to the Scientology events, and then go home, write a report that night, so I was fresh in my mind. And they would call me to find out if I had attended an event. I must have been on a list. And yeah, I was at the event in New Haven. Oh yeah, I was up at the event in Norwich. So what I did is I had a friend of mine in Europe attend the event, and then he would tell me all about it, and I would report it as if I had been there.
I see.
So now they're like, hey, did you go to that event? No, I couldn't go. My kid was sick. So now they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not Patty. So I would do that every so often, is have this other person report on the event to me. And that kept them going for a while. And then eventually they had a Scientologist who they were blackmailing, befriend me. And I ended up telling her who I was, and she ended up reporting it to OSA. So then they came after me. They put up one of their hate pages on what's it called?
Back then it was called Religious Freedom Watch,
Religious
right?
Freedom Watch. Yeah, they gave me my own special hate page. They printed my bankruptcy paper. They twisted a lot. I mean, some of the stuff they said was true, but it was a twist to make it look like I was, no good. And I wore it as a badge of honor. It didn't. I used to give that link out all the time, because it was like, you know what, bring it on. I don't care. I'm going to speak out because you guys are no good, and you cannot. There's nothing you can do to hurt me. I won't allow it. My family was already out, so I didn't have to worry about that. My husband and my son didn't want anything to do with Scientology, so it's just me, and I couldn't imagine, what can you do? Follow me around, or like I said in that day, what are you going to do? Call up my boss and tell him I blew up a planet? It's ridiculous. So I stood out, knowing that I was one of the worst of the worst as far as being a OSA person, and I had to really eat that. I had to really deal with that, and I guess again, that's why I did so much to work to destroy them, because they had it coming.
Well, and then so that talk at the pub was in 2008. When did the SP parties begin? That summer?
Yeah, I think they did. I had originally it was my little IRC group with Dave and Katie and Scott and a few others. I think maybe even Chuck was there, and I was giving out little rewards. But after that, it started. I wanted to invite more and more people, and it just got bigger and bigger. And we ended up with lobsters and steak, and the pool, and everybody was having. It was so much fun, and I really didn't get to enjoy it so much because I was running it.
I
And
remember you were very stressed. You were working way too hard at your own party.
yeah, so I was thinking I need a party planner because I didn't really get to talk to people, but I spent a lot of time making sure people were talking with each other and having fun. And anyway, those it got too big at one point, and it needed the last one was just got too crazy for me. So I decided to back off for a while. Who knows? Maybe I'll get together with some in the future. Well, you have your Howdy Con. Maybe that.
Well, I have to say, I think it partly inspired HowdyCon. So, because your last SP party was around 2012 or 13, right?
Yep.
And my first HowdyCon was 2016, and we held it in Cleveland. And not only did Professor Turetsky come, he flew in his own plane.
Yeah, he flew into my parties in his own plane too,
So
and
cool.
he brought some people from Pennsylvania with him. I think he stopped and picked up a few people. Yeah, Dave. Dave actually, not many people know Dave had that plane, but what he used to do is he on his own dime he would deliver organs from organ donors from one hospital from Pittsburgh from all over the country. He'd fly and deliver those organs to people for transplants. And never took a dime for it. Just did it out of goodness, and that's the type of guy he was.
But Scientology tried to destroy him and tried to make him look like a
Well,
crazy
they did. They hated him, but I talked to Dave a lot, and one of the things Dave told me when I would be worried about something. I know it just sounds kind of strange, but he would say the only way to handle these guys, and I'm not talking about specific Scientologists, that has to be a nice thing, but on the organization, the only way to handle these guys is with ridicule, is just look down and say, really, look at how stupid you are for doing this, and don't give them any sort of power or any sort of like, wow, these guys are really cool. They can do a lot of stuff legally. No, no, no. Just just like, and once I adopted that viewpoint, I sort of became not afraid of them anymore, or not that I was ever really afraid of them, but I always had a thing about bullies, and they were just the worst of the bullies that I'd ever dealt with, and I just decided, nah, let's take these guys on. This is going to be make it fun, and I did.
Well, you sure did. I mean, the Tom Cruise video alone should put you in the Hall of Fame. And then, of
Right.
course, for example, another thing I think that you're responsible for, um, because as part of Christie's database, you were putting in magazines, and I'm pretty sure you're the source for some of the early magazines that laid out the statuses for donations.
Yeah.
So when on the underground bunker you see me say, "Oh, they're gold meritorious," that means they gave $1 million.
Hmm.
It's Patty who, that we owe because you found those original document publications where they laid that all out. Because today they don't. See,
No.
today they're more careful, and so they will just say gold and assume that Scientology knows what they're talking about. But back in the day, you provided copies of the magazines where it said gold meritorious equals $1 million in donations. And
Right.
that's how, for example, I learned that Tom Cruise was the first platinum meritorious, which is a donation of $2.5 million.
Wow.
It was a magazine that you had found
Impact.
and you had put online and showed, because you can still go that, every once in a while I'll be searching around and I'll find one of these old postings at the WWP forums, and there'll be a list of all these donation statuses and people who've donated, and sure enough it'll be Patty as the person that posted it.
Yeah, well, again, that kind of information at the time, it just seemed like, okay, let's just throw this out here. But I knew based on how much money they were collecting that this is going to be good information. And I always thought of journalists or reporters or TV people because I used to get contacted quite a bit once I became publicly known. Again, I was sending out CDs of all kinds of stuff to everybody, in hopes that they use it or at least be educated by it.
Yeah, I mean it's. I don't know how you can see that Tom Cruise video and not realize there's something very wrong about this
Right.
group, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
He's
it's infamous, you know.
Yeah.
So
No, it's people watch it and just their mouths hang open. They can't believe that this guy is like this. It's like, wow, look at this dude because he has such a different personality. His public personality is so different.
right. So what's the latest, Patty? I haven't talked to you a whole lot lately. What's been going on?
Well, I put on my profile, I'm a semi retired merchant of chaos. I still enjoy reading up about Scientology. I know the Daily Beast sometimes, I think they read your article and then write stuff about it. I sort of keep up, but I don't really do all the work that I used to do. I certainly will pass on information if I have it, but I sort of I'm sitting back and watching them really just disappear slowly but surely. They're just dying off, especially after COVID. But you knew it was going to happen. I mean, you got an organization with a 1950s viewpoint of the world. That's just not going to work. You got lies. You got big money being going in and all this abuse that's taking place with the Sea Org and the staff. It's such an abusive organization. Sometimes I read stuff and it's almost too painful. I can't read it because I've been there. I don't want that anymore. But I generally want to know what's going on with the lawsuits and keeping it in. Anytime I see anything I can contribute an opinion or give a some background data if I was involved, I try to contribute that just because sometimes those little nuggets are important. But no, I'm just sort of being a grandma these days and having fun.
Well, I always enjoy it when I see that you commented at the Underground Bunker because you have a wicked sense of humor.
Thank you. I tend to be a little bit irreverent with them, don't I? Just like it's like it's because I have so little tolerance of them now, and I pick it up sometimes with your voice, and you make me laugh when I read your stuff. I know where you're going with it, and that's what's so important because you of all the wogs in the world have the best understanding of Scientology than anybody else. You really understand. You can think like them. You know how they think, and you can. That is so important when communicating with people who are getting out or trying to leave. The fact that you have that much understanding, it's amazing.
Well, thank you. But it's brave people like you that have brought out information, and I'm so glad that you have gotten as much credit as you have. I think you deserve a lot more. But there are other people who have risked a lot to get out information that will never identify themselves. And I wish people knew how much the chances those people have taken. There are other people that have just done wonderful work
Yep.
getting us the information out because this is a litigious, vindictive, bullying organization
Yep.
that does not like people knowing what's going on behind closed doors. But we today know so much more,
Mm.
in particular because of you, Patty.
Well, thank you so much. I understand why people don't want to necessarily give up because Scientology has, these guys have all been audited and Scientology knows what's in their background. And, while they want to expose the cult, they don't want to necessarily have their indiscretions brought up, which Scientology will do. And again, I didn't have enough indiscretions apparently, other than bankruptcy, that they could mess with me on. So I, I had no real fear of them after a while. It took me a while not to be afraid of them because that fear was so ingrained. But yeah, I'm so happy that people, whether they do it anonymously or not, I appreciate all the the recent insider person you have, that they're giving great information that keeps us up on what's going on. I wish I had one of those inside.
Well, and I just have one more memory I want to share. I was in your backyard having some corn on the cob and lobster, and somebody, I don't even remember who now, brought me some documents while I was sitting there and said, you might want to see some of these. Because that was one other thing that was going on at your parties, was people were there to share information. And I think that was the time I brought Paulette Cooper with me. And Paulette and I were going through some interesting documents somebody had given us. And that's where I found the interview with 6-year-old Neil Gaiman.
Oh yeah, that's right. I had a folder. I had a big box, and people were going through it for stuff. Somebody found, yeah, I something I had collected over the year.
And when Neil was 6, Scientology was really going through a tough period in England, and Parliament was thinking of kicking them out. And so Scientology wanted to produce an example of how good Scientology is for its members, even a 6-year-old child. And this, this kid, this brilliant little kid, actually did a BBC interview about his, what he had learned in Scientology, and then Scientology took the transcript of that and put it in a pamphlet to distribute to members of Parliament to try to sway them.
Yep.
And I first learned about that sitting in your backyard, Patty. So that's how great your parties were. Eventually, someone actually, BBC, and I remember I wrote to the BBC saying, please search your archives. We've got to get the audio for this. They never responded to me, but about a year later, they found it, and they put some of it on the air. Neil Gaiman, of course, today is one of the world's most famous fantasy science fiction authors. He is no longer in Scientology, but all of his family still is, so he's careful about what he says.
Right.
But anyway, I just wanted to share that because that's one of my treasured memories from being in your backyard at the great parties.
Yep. Well, yeah.
Well, Patty, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Your
dear.
story is amazing, and I hope people get a chance to look at this video that you relocated, and I hope you hear some fun things in the comments.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tone. Really appreciate it.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.
To witness history, ride the storm, wait to see how reckoning